everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming today. I'm actually going to let the designers introduce themselves, because I think they'll put it much better than I would. So why don't we go ahead down the line and make introductions.
I'm Jenna. I am currently the co-founder of Avocado software. We make apps for couples, so public and private communication and collaboration. Formerly of Google a long time ago, worked with some of these folks that are on the stage and many of you in the audience. And currently, I'm just focused on making venture capitalists hug their iPhones during demos.
Hi, my name is Ryan Freitas. I am the co-founder of About.me, and I run product there. Trained as an interaction designer, formerly of Adaptive Path. The About.me story is one that some of you may know. It's an identity platform that was acquired very quickly after launch by AOL. We spent 2 years inside. We bought it back, and I now run the product independently alongside my co-founder, Tony Conrad.
Hi, I'm Chad Thornton. I'm a design manager at Uber. Back in the day, I was also at Google, and then after that, co-founded a couple of startups, and then joined Airbnb as the first UX designer.
My name is Braden Kowitz. I'm a design partner at Google Ventures. I worked at Google for about 4 years, and then for the last 5 years, I've been helping all the startups that Google Ventures invests in, helping them be better at design. So we just kind of go from project to project and startup to startup and help them with everything from user research to product design to branding, just go to everything.
Great. So there have been a lot of great presentations. We've seen a lot of design over the last day and a half. And there may be designers here who have come up with startup ideas or have things that they'd like to build. So what's maybe one thing that they can learn from your startup experience? Anyone want to take this?
I think it's hard. Every startup experience is so unique that the advice you'll get on a panel like this is going to be very general. We'll try to do our best, but individual questions are better. So save up some for the end and find mentors. But I mean, for me, the biggest thing that I've learned working with startups is how fast you have to iterate. That you can work on something and believe it's amazing, and then end up showing it to people and find out very quickly that's not the thing that they want. So the faster you can get into testing out your ideas, the better.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you can do beyond understand the speed at which things move is to educate yourself around the business of what you're doing. Design founders are often at a disadvantage, not ever been exposed potentially to some of the ins and outs of financing, the legal perspective. Making certain that you walk into the situation completely prepared, or as prepared as you can be, is extraordinarily advantageous compared to somebody who doesn't know exactly what they're getting into.
I think that's an interesting point that really would love to hear more about. Talk to me a little bit about the transition from being a designer at a large company or a designer, an independent designer in school, to being part of the business, making the business decisions and doing things like that. So maybe, Jenna, you can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so I left Google and YouTube after almost 6 years and created a startup with just myself and my co-founder, and right now we're 6 total people. And I think the biggest thing is that you don't just get to do design. You're responsible for your company's bank account and your employees' salaries and the health insurance and making sure that people get to, their families can thrive and that they are acting like normal human beings. And then on top of all of that, you have to do all of the brand thinking, all of the design, all of the interaction specs, all of the icons, 5,000 million launcher icons for Android, making sure that looks all good. And you basically have to shed your idea that you can be responsible for perfect, super high quality design because you have so much other stuff going on. And then there's the lawyers and the trademark and the competitors and wondering what they're up to. And you don't just get to do design as a designer founder.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way in that, designers like to say it's not just how it looks, it's how it works as well. And when you get into the startup world, it's how it looks, it's how it works, but it's also what it is and the value you're trying to create for people. And then even deeper than that, how you put together a team that figures out how to deliver that value over and over again. And so a startup designer, yeah, you can do that top level stuff and you're very good at it, but you're also going to need to work at those lower levels as well.
Yeah, I think when you're in this world where you don't actually know if your business model is going to work out, you have to just be a lot more diligent about always asking that question and testing that out. And and be comfortable not shipping the best product if you can learn from it faster, if you're more willing to iterate, if you're asking if you're setting up things in a way that you're able to learn faster, really.
Well, I think one other thing is that when you have so few resources, like going from a company like Google where if you happen to fall asleep at 4 in the morning like normal human beings do and some emergency happens, like there's always somebody else to address the emergency. But when you're a founder and the buck stops at you, and so you're responsible for everything. And there is no other resource. There's no release valve. Like if somebody on your team doesn't do it, you have to do it, whatever that thing is. And a lot of times that's not design.
Absolutely. No, the design piece that you may get comfortable with early on in your career, once you become a founder, is one of your many jobs. And we talked a little bit about this, about the pressure of, okay, I'm supposed to be the lead designer, I'm supposed to touch everything first, or I'm responsible for this going all the way through. How do I balance that with everything else I'm supposed to be doing? And you hit upon it early in your first answer with, you are responsible for these people and your entire team's ability to provide for their families. And the weight of that responsibility is tremendous. And sometimes your choices are between make the business work and make certain this is pixel perfect. Pixel perfect loses almost every time.
And you also have to focus, like at a really small, like pre-product market fit company, you have to focus on growth over anything else. So if you have a bug, it doesn't get fixed because it's not gonna like help with user growth or acquisition or anything like that. And so your priorities really change. And as a designer who, like at a larger company, was focused on quality and like precision and at making things really tight within like the design role that you were given, you have to give almost all of that up and just be like, what can I do to get this done? How fast can I grow? My bank account is draining out. Like,
it's a series of terrible choices.
I think that's hard for people too, because you want to be a good designer, and what is good design is things like this beautiful, animation behind us and this beautiful space that we've got. This is great design. And so as a small startup, you kind of want to look big in some ways, and you want to spend a lot of time doing that polish work. But oftentimes, that's not the right stuff to be focused on. It's a tactic. You can say, we have to deliver delight because we're doing a game, or we're doing a financial product, so it has to be polished enough so that people believe that it's trustworthy. But that design is just a tactic that you can use and you can employ, or you can focus on other more important things.
You said delight. You have to take a shot.
So there's a lot of pressures, a lot of things going on. So let's talk about how maybe you make some decisions about how to make good design decisions. Instead of only focusing on what's urgent, right? I think that's a decision that we all make as user experience folks in anything we do, right? People come to us, something's very urgent, but you have to decide how you're going to move forward. So how does that happen at a startup?
I think pushing the decision making, not just be, the hardest thing as a founder is the belief that all the decisions need to come from you, and that's something you need to abandon as quickly as possible. It has to be, you have to democratize that as quickly as possible and get everyone to understand that the team is responsible for the delivery of quality and excellent experience. And that may mean different things to different people, but we've been at it for a number of years. The consistency of our delivery reinforces that every person who's brought into the team knows that we have standards. We have a belief in providing specific tools, a particular experience. If those decisions continually have to go through one person, there's going to be a point at which it all collapses.
So another thing that comes up when we think about startup design is investor-directed design, right? So you have to someone comes in and says, oh, you should make it a different color or something. Talk to me a little bit about investors and kind of key figures that might be involved in startup design who you didn't expect.
I think this is where you and I disagree.
Totally.
This is my tactic. Sure, yes. Yes, of course, that's incredibly brilliant. Thank you for your time and attention.
And I think that's where I started out. The first company that I was with, I was an early design employee, and there were investors that were very interested in making comments about the design and the direction, and I was like this. I had absolutely no use for it. Over time, I think I've matured my perspective a little bit, if only to think that these people are actively invested in you and your team and the success of the product. Some of them see far across their own portfolios. They get pitches from people who aren't even in the portfolios. They're seeing tons of tremendous ideas that you're focused. You're building your own company. You're not seeing the things that they are. So it's a balancing act, right? I think I went from F off, I don't want to listen to any of this, because it's going to pollute my perspective on my own.
The bottom lines are totally different. I'm responsible for building a market and building a product, and they're responsible for making their investment grow, right? They are focused on money, and I'm focused on product quality. And like those two things are oftentimes mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
Like,
and there's also
the time that they devote to thinking about you or your product deeply is so surface that you can't really get great. I mean, unless you have an amazing investor like Braden.
So the way I think about it, you're absolutely right that when someone who's given you $1 million says, make the button blue, you're like, oh man, should I make the button blue? I don't know. It's like,
but good investors don't make those kinds of directives. They show you other things
blue,
that...
But I think of it much like customer feedback. So if you talk to a customer and they're like, I want a faster horse, you don't just go try to make a faster horse. You figure, like, why do you want that? And you dig a couple levels deep, and then often you get to things like, well, I'm worried about distribution, or how are you going to get this to customers? Or I'm worried about whether you can really scale and make this thing in a certain way. And when you get to those core issues or fears that they have about your business, then you can start to figure out what to change in your product.
The thing I've seen work well is, it's hard to do, but if you can get a number of investors in a room and make it almost more like a sort of an earlier stage brainstorming session, it kind of puts them more on their A game, because they're kind of, investors with investors. It's less like
you've changed the context entirely. I think there's a natural instinct for designers to they have an allergy to dilettantism. Somebody who doesn't have the background that they do coming in and making commentary. And the easiest way to kind of transform those conversations into something helpful is to ask, okay, this is your art direction feedback. What is it in the service of what goal? Like, let's get back to core principles. Why do you think this change is necessary? And then we can actually explore solutions in the way that a good design team does.
I think any individual investor might have some reasonably thought out design advice for you. And I don't know how you got all your investors in the room at the same time, because that seems impossible. But
take out.
Collectively, if you have more than 3 or 4, they're like the worst client you've ever had. They all have different feedback. It's mutually exclusive. It's to serve their own purpose, and you can't reconcile it within the design in a reasonably holistic way. And so you don't know what to do. Like, you have 5 or 6 people telling you wrote you really big checks, that they feel really strongly that the app should be free or not free or whatever, and you have to listen, but then your other investor will be like, oh no, it has to be free, and one will be like, oh, it has to be paid, you have to have a business model right away, and what do you do with that?
The most important piece in any of that, though, is a designer needs to maintain their point of view. They have to come back to, this is what I wanted to put out into the world. If they're opening that up to speculation or suggestion from everybody and anybody, then they've lost the plot. They don't know what road they're on.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times, investors aren't designers or even product people, and they're finance people, they're business people, and so they will give you the most randomizing design feedback, if you can make it like Snapchat, your things could disappear, and if you could just be Snapchat, that'd be really cool. If your app was just maybe you just changed the name from Avocado to Snapchat and maybe release that. They don't know how to give feedback. They're not trained in that, so.
So that might not be great advice, right?
So full of horrible advice.
Yeah. So so lots of people will come to you, they'll give advice, you'll ask users for advice. There's all kinds of ways that people want to have input on your thing. What's the best startup design advice that you've gotten from an unexpected source?
Good one. Remember to be human. It's easy to forget when you're trying to ship a product, trying to find out if it works, and the line between yourself and your company is so blurry that when someone says, when an investor comes up to you and says, oh, well, the company's not really working out the way that it should be, it's really underperforming or whatever, you feel like that's talking basically directly into your soul, and it's really easy to forget that you're a human being and you have to separate from the design, and you have to let some of the design go, and you just have to let some things go. You literally can't do everything, and you have to remember to be a human being. I don't know where that advice came from, but it was good advice.
I think the advice you gave earlier, what was it? Get a therapist and a
personal trainer.
And a personal trainer. That sounds kind of silly, but
it's trite, but it's true.
No,
I'll +1 the therapy thing.
If you're not taking care of yourself, God, you wind up in a situation where you're under tremendous pressure that you are sharing day to day with only one person because you want to keep that away from your team. We've been talking quite a bit about the umbrella. You are trying to stay above them, making certain that they don't get covered by everything that's raining down on them constantly. That takes a toll, both a mental and a physical toll. You have to make certain that some part of your day or some part of your week is devoted to making certain that you're all right.
Yeah.
It's also really lonely. Like when you're working at a big company, you're working on a team, but like you're working with other designers and user experience researchers and stuff, and these are kind of people that understand you and speak your language. But when you're in a really small team, like if you're less than 10, you're not going to have 2 designers. Like you're it. And well, I mean, maybe you will. I don't know. I would hire 10 engineers before I hired a designer, but like it's really lonely, and you don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of that is kind of in the design profession. Like I picked a buddy of mine that I used to work with and like sent him mock-ups on the sly, and it was like, hey, can you just tell me if this is crazy or not? Because you start to really feel crazy. Like, am I building the right thing? Like, is this boring? Like, what am I doing?
Yeah, the lack of peer input is it's daunting. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, like almost all the startup designers I talk to who are at small companies feel very lonely. Like there's no one in their company that can give them feedback. There's no one to give them a reality check. So for them, like we try to be that support on our design team, but also, you know, it's great if they can create a mentorship, a set of people that they can get coaching from.
Where were you when I needed you? I was so lonely.
So it sounds like one idea might be having kind of a Las Vegas for designers where they can go and share stories and it all stays there, right? Like,
Totally.
It doesn't go anywhere. So
the other big thing that I've learned is that often when teams are fighting, we should do something, we should do A, we should do B, and they fight back and forth. For me, I've learned to see that as the canary in the coal mine, that we don't have enough data. Like often you don't realize what you don't know. You're just like, it's this kind of this invisible thing, this unknown. But when you start fighting really hard about what you should do, it's usually a good indicator that you probably don't know something. So that's a great time to take a step back and think about, what is it that we don't know, and could we design an experiment or a test or do customer interviews or do something to bring data into that so that instead of spending all of our time arguing, we can very quickly get into execution again.
Do you think entrenched opinion is a sign that the good questions aren't getting asked?
Yeah, absolutely. Or that you don't have enough data to sway the other people along.
In more mature organizations, what is that like? What have you seen? I mean, you've seen it mid and large scale.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I feel like the larger the organization gets, the more diligent they get about sort of using data in, you know, a variety of useful ways.
Right.
You know, early on, it's hard to stay disciplined and actually say like, what is the hypothesis we're testing, and like, how can we actually validate this?
Yes.
You know, you hear it, you know, all over the internet with lean startup this and that,
Yeah.
but like to actually see that through, unbelievably hard.
Absolutely. I mean, there are organizations that do KPIs and goal setting really well, and then, I mean, you see across the portfolio, I don't know how many small stage startups are really good about saying, I mean, you talked about making decisions based on growth. Other startups have different goals, but like, if every decision is not coming back to something, some kind of goal, then you can very quickly wind up losing exactly what you're trying to do.
Well, and then there's all the accidental successes where something just went crazy and they didn't really take the time to understand why, and they're like, yes, more of that. Like, just keep doing the thing that we were doing, and then you realize like a year in or 2 years in, you're trying to build a business, and the founder, you know, like, God bless him, but, and I said not him, but they like just stumbled into this luck and they don't actually know how to run a business, and like that's when you need to like bring in an adult, you know, to kind of like handle the situation. But I don't know, it's a whole lot of luck and
that was your point. Like,
a much smaller amount of talent, and
no one knows what they're doing.
No one knows what they're doing. I mean, that's the secret of tiny startups is nobody knows what they're doing. Nobody has a plan. And if they have a plan, they're just fooling themselves. No one knows what we're doing. None of us know what we're doing.
And yet, we're all up here on stage. So
any one of these people could be up here too.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about timing. So about like how you think about starting something, when you make decisions, how you decide to launch design changes or things like that. Timing, I think, is something that is really relevant to startup design, and it comes up like, is it too fast? Is it too slow? Do we know what our goals are? Anyone speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of randomness in the market. Sometimes you can just, start your startup at a very bad time, macroeconomic time, and sometimes you can do the opposite. And it's almost impossible for everyone to tell where that is. And so I think a lot of it's getting comfortable with that there is a lot of luck in this industry, and you have to sail with the winds.
Well, that's what it comes back to in terms of like any person's story about their startup success is generally entirely experiential. You can't recreate a path. There is no cookbook. Timing is the devil in the details. You don't know what the macroeconomic situation is going to be in 6 months. So do you raise now? Do you raise later? Do you focus on growth? Do you focus on engagement? Do you focus entirely on that partnership or bringing in a strategic partner that could, as an investor, that could change the game for you in terms of distribution? Those decisions are entirely weighted by how aware you are of what's going on in the larger picture. I know plenty of founders who are completely heads down trying to make their businesses work, paying not any piece of attention to anything besides the quality of the product and their bank account. And they'll figure out when to raise based on how low the amount in the bank account is.
And raising is its own distraction. Like, you basically stop all product. Like, if you're a designer that wants to become a startup founder, you have to get used to the idea that the product is going to move forward without you for like 3 to 6 months while you're fundraising. Like, fundraising is a full-time job. It's all-inclusive, and it's so distracting. It's distracting for your employees. It's distracting for you. I basically don't get to do what I wanted to do when I created a startup, which is design a product and ship it to the world. Like, you just have to like go to meetings with like white dudes in khaki pants and be like, I like steak too.
I mean, you have shipped an amazing product to the world that has many, many users. So like the output of what you've done is that.
Well, it basically gets frozen during fundraising.
Yeah.
So like we have these periods where we ship like once a month or every 3 weeks or something. And by the way, I do have an opinion on speed. Like, when you're like tiny startup and with limited resources, like, it's always too slow.
Absolutely.
Like, everything you do is always too slow based on the number of dollars that you have.
I don't think that changes across the spectrum. I mean, we're all under ridiculous time pressure because there's always an assumption that something is going to be on fire tomorrow. And
Yeah.
if it's not public opinion, it's your base. If it's not
Well,
the
I think
base,
at a place
it's
like
your data center.
Uber that's in growth stage right now, like, I think that like the leaders need to realize when the inflection point is and kind of deliberately slow things down and be like, okay, how are we going to grow thoughtfully, and how are we going to change our product thinking like more deliberately? But like we're pretty okay here. Like, you just got to go as fast as you can and just throw all the spaghetti against the wall and see what falls off.
Yeah, I think there's also so you guys have talked about sort of timing related to raising money and all this. You two both had successful startups. I had 2 startups, neither of which were successful, and I think that's kind of a tougher thing too. Is like, what's your timing around saying like, this isn't working? Like,
right.
I need to go make money. I need to do something else because just emotionally, this is like, it's going to kill me. And that's a hard call to make.
So how did you make the call?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess the first one was easy. We weren't getting funded.
Okay.
And yeah.
Somebody else made the decision.
Yeah, someone else made the decision for you. Yeah, the second one was tougher. It was the co-founder and I just really weren't getting along, and I think that was a really hard learning lesson. I should have done more due diligence kind of up front and sort of figured out what roles we were each going to play and just sort of like set that up. And you just have to realize like, okay, sunk cost is like the worst cognitive bias because you're like, I've sunk so much time into this, like I just need to see something's going to happen, right? And then just to realize like, no, time for something else.
The reality check, the cold shower, is like something you start asking yourself like when you get to like, I don't know, like 50% of your initial seed investment in your bank account. You're like, is this working? And then like, you just keep saying like, yeah, we're crushing it, yeah. And then like, you just like from that day on, the first time you ask yourself that question, every single day you ask yourself that question, is this working? Is it time to throw in the towel? What are we doing? And like, thinking about closing a startup that you devoted your entire all your extra energy to is like thinking about cutting off your leg. It's like well, at least for me anyway.
Oh, absolutely. No,
it's like having someone suggest to me that I amputate a part of my body, like that I worked on that cell division really hard to like grow that leg, and then you just have to cut it off.
Yep. So we've heard about a lot of the positives and negatives. I want to hit on one more positive before I have a couple more serious questions. What's the most exciting moment for you when you've done launched a startup, launched a design, co-founded? There are a lot of pain points, but what's the most exciting moment?
For me, going from a big company to working with startups, the biggest change was how hungry they are for design work. So if you're in a big company, you've got your design and you talk to the engineers and like, well, I can't build half of that. And you talk to the product managers and like, they all want something different. And your design gets eroded into something very, very small. And if you're an agency, you ship a lot of things over the wall and you're hoping like, I hope they build one of these. And you're shipping and shipping and shipping, right? But at a startup, when I started to work with them, I was blown away with how hungry they were. So they would come in with a problem, and I would say, how about something like this? And they'd go, great. And they'd build it the next day and ship it. I'm like, oh, that's so exciting and so different than the way I was used to working.
Yeah.
I have a really specific moment. We screwed up our iOS submission for our very first launch, and it went out 24 hours in advance of when we were actually organizing all our press releases and stuff. And we got a phone call from our lead iOS dev that says, guys, like, we're live in the store, and like somebody just bought the app. And at the time, our app was like $5 or something ridiculous, so that we could keep the crowd small. We didn't know how we were going to scale. And and that was like the most exciting moment for me. I built something from scratch that somebody that I don't know, that wasn't my friend or family, paid money to use. And that was like the best moment in Avocado history. And it was a complete accident. We were all out to dinner celebrating the launch, and we went live when no one was paying attention. But it was awesome.
When people use what you built, it's the whole rule in the design business is don't design for yourself. The original version of About.me was specifically to solve a problem that we thought 5 people had, and then it just turned into something that millions of people are using on a daily basis. It was a huge cognitive shift for me to be like, okay, these are the things that I would want, this is the way I would want to set it up, this is different from everything else, and we're going to put it out there into the world. And for that to catch on, or even for the brand to be recognizable, or when I introduce myself and somebody says, oh yeah, I have an About.me page, that's just like something going on in the back of my head, because I didn't expect any of this. So that's a powerful thing. It's dangerous, because the ego latches onto that, and you're like, okay, well, what does this mean?
No, don't worry. It's a really short trip from that high to the trough of despair.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's like a week, and then you're in the trough of despair again. So it's all good.
It's a good thing.
It might even be that same day, actually.
It keeps you honest. That's the best piece.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It's growth. I think more to the point, it's growth when sort of not intentional growth, but it's growth because you did something and then that thing actually kind of panned out, not sort of the accidental, like, threw something in the wall and it stuck.
It's like when something happens intentionally instead of by accident, you're like, yay, I'm smart.
Causality. Love it.
So my last question is kind of serious. As I look at the room and I think about the world, and I recently moved here from China, so in the news we hear that startups some of the designers are fairly elitist and don't really represent the rest of the world, right? Or the world we live in, or the problems we have, right? So what would, what will you do as a designer, or what do you do to kind of make that not an issue next year?
Chad.
The hard one.
I mean,
sorry.
So I guess just to clarify, is this a question about kind of like how to be more inclusive on design teams, or?
How would you interpret it? Because I think we could talk about the inclusivity of teams, but also the kinds of products that we work on.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I guess I'm kind of a big like design education nerd, so I think it actually starts a lot earlier. Like, how do you get a wider variety of people to think about design as a discipline that's really exciting to them? I came through, I was a biologist as an undergrad, and like that's totally shaped, as a systems thinker, that's shaped how I feel about things. But I feel like we need sort of more of that kind of breadth in the thinking space of designers. I guess to me that's like inclusiveness, I guess.
I think it's hard to get away from this idea, like you said, it's like you got to create a product. Like when you're creating a new market, you have to create a product that you would want to use and you would understand. And as a founder, you have to be like super, super passionate about that idea and be like a 1-minute active user of your own product. And so I think that, obviously we're here, we have a certain amount of privilege, and those things sort of don't, like, they don't sort of come naturally to say like, oh, well, how can I solve internet access in third world countries that don't have power. But I do think that designers are well positioned through both their empathy and and just kind of like their holistic, yeah, I know, hit the buzzer, I said empathy. And they're like, like the people in this room are going to solve those problems. And like we all need to be better about pitching in towards problems that we can solve that help the world instead of problems we're solving for ourselves. But I think that there's this weird balance of like, what are you going to give up your whole life for when you create a business and a product? And I think it's really hard to, at least initially, be like, well, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to just give it all away. And I don't know. It's a fine line.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I come at it from the perspective of I can build a team that represents a better mix. You know, you were talking about inclusivity. I'm just trying to find the best possible talent that also makes certain that they believe in what we're trying to build. But I also am keeping an eye. We're 40% female on a 25-person team, which I'm proud of, but it's not sufficient. Like, it's one of those things that's great, nice golf clap. Let's keep moving. The bigger issue for me is the product and the problem that I'm working on day-to-day basis really all that important? I mean, and that's, I think, a little bit of the commentary that's been very frequent. It's like, does anybody need another photo sharing app? Does anybody need another messaging app? Well, yeah. Does anybody need an identity platform? OK, if I take a look at it from that perspective, no. But if I take a look at it from the perspective of democratizing access to being able to represent yourself online, to taking some kind of curatorial control over how you are represented in a Google search results page or something like that, I feel like we're doing something very important, and I'm going to double down on making certain the most people that can use it are using it and are aware of what we're building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it can be very easy to be cynical about the world of startups, to pick out a couple startups and say, oh, these people are not making the world better. But with startups, it's a very big umbrella, and I don't know, I've been lucky enough to work with people that are helping businesses get access to credit where otherwise they wouldn't, to cancer care, and just really important stuff for the world. And if you choose to play in this arena, you can choose where you spend your time and where you focus it.
And the other thing is that you don't really know how people are going to use your products or how it's going to change their lives until you ship it to the world. So like we have a ton of military couples using our app to like stay connected remotely, and they're able to hug their phone and hug their enlisted spouse that's halfway across the world. And we had people using it to keep track of like Hurricane Sandy damage and like where their loved ones are. And I think I've heard stories of people who were in labor who couldn't get a cab that like called an Uber. Like, I mean, you just never know how there's pockets of like in our selfishness to build products that we want to use. Like, I think there's pockets of like truly affecting people's lives in a positive way. That's not just like for 20-year-old hooded like Harvard grads, whatever.
Cynicism is an easy gig. I come back to this a lot because we were talking about this earlier. Every co-founding team probably needs a cynic and an optimist, someone to keep the wheels on while the other person is out there really selling the vision, maybe even far beyond where the reality of everything is, getting, as my co-founder says, out-kicking the coverage every once in a while. But that cynicism needs to not impact the way we view the quality and the type of work that we're doing. There's always that potential for something beautiful to happen, even at the most base of problem-solving sets.
Excellent. So I think we're going to take questions from the audience now. So please, I don't know if there's a mic or if you just speak up. There's a mic. So
please ask us questions. We're all so lonely already.
Hi. You mentioned the pain of having to give up the delight just to focus more on important tasks. And you mentioned satisfying investors, whereas sometimes you have to satisfy investors that don't exist yet. So my question is actually, what do you think of, or actually, if and when should product and design or user experience should be separated to two different people or teams?
I'm the CPO of my company of 6 people, but yeah, my co-founder and I are responsible for the long-term vision of what we want the company to be and how we want it to grow. But I'm responsible for diving down into that and what does it look like for the products? What platforms are we going to ship to? I mean, we make a lot of decisions together, but then I sort of I think having the same person responsible for product and design at a really small startup is the right. I mean,
it's unavoidable.
I'm going to say it's the correct thing because I'm an asshole, but it's like I think it's the right thing to do for a really small company is to have the person that's responsible for the product also be a designer.
But there also needs to be some kind of friction between the way the business is being run and the design decisions that are being made, because otherwise it's just the opportunity is dictating the solution. You need somebody actually thinking critically about how to get at the solution, as opposed to just saying, okay, this is the market, this is what we're going to do from a dollar basis, and these are the things, the feature set that we asked everybody, and this is the features that we were told to build.
Yeah, if you're looking for a co-founder and you're a designer, go for a business person. Like, don't go for another designer or another product person. Like, that's two designer founders seems like way too many cooks in that kitchen already. Like, I don't know. It seems like a disaster.
All right. Another question?
Hello, all.
Hi, Sean.
So I have a question that you guys talked about. It's about motivation. So designers as decision makers and people within companies, it seems like often are looking for more responsibility or being closer to the decisions that are made. And so it seems like that might be kind of a motivation behind why a designer might decide to be a founder. But then from what you guys are saying, it sounds like a lot of the responsibility that you pick up doesn't really have anything to do with design at all. And then on top of that, it can be lonely, hard to stay human, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess maybe personally for you guys as well as just in general, like what's the upside, and does it really make sense for a designer to be a founder in order to get more responsibility, or is it really something else that drives?
I have one thing on this, is I've been listening to designers complain about not having a seat at the table for going on 20 years. It's ludicrous. You have a seat at the table, just sit the down. There's this perceived or learned helplessness on the part of the design community that they can't get involved in business decisions, or that no one wants them there, or they don't have a voice. You're welcome. There is an opportunity to get in there. You are no longer laughed at in pitch meetings because you're a designer and you're sitting down with a business co-founder in order to get something built. That's one thing. The second piece is, yes, absolutely, if you are a designer and you feel like you want to have some control over the thing that's going to be built or the thing that you are going to work on for either the rest of your life or for the next 10 years, absolutely, take the jump. There's no reason not to.
I'm going to say no to that, because if the only reason that you're starting a startup is to be a boss of something, then don't do it, because you will burn out on your idea, you'll burn out on your product, you'll pivot a million times, and then you'll sink into the trough of despair anyway. Like, you have to have both the willingness, the desire to be the person that the buck stops with, which is an outrageously huge and devastating responsibility, because designers take things into themselves. But like the umbrella is really hard for a designer, because you just absorb the empathy, you absorb it all into yourself, but you have nowhere to output it to. I would say that unless you have an idea that's burning a hole in your brain and the drive to want to be your own boss and be responsible for other people's lives, if you have one or the other, I mean, at least from my personal experience, I would not do it if you are not just like waking up at night thinking of the same idea for like a year.
On the other hand, designers have such an amazing skill set for founding companies. We are so good at faking things. And we can make stuff just look good on the veneer, but actually be nothing underneath. Like it's just a little prototype or whatever. That's totally what you need to start a startup. And it just, it depends on what you consider design. If all you consider design is the visual layer, then yeah, you're not going to be getting to do much of that. But if you consider design as figuring out what people really need and crafting an organization and a culture that can deliver that to them, your design work is designing the team, and then absolutely you can still be a designer.
I would also say there's a huge difference in the drive to make a product and the drive to create a company or a business. Like those two are completely separate, and well, they're mostly separate, but you got to figure out deep down in your soul searching whether you want to make a product or whether you want to make a business.
Yeah, it sounds weird to say, but some of the most thrilling moments in the last startup I was working on were more about designing the business model than about designing sort of the nuances of the product. So if you can find a way to get excited about that, then that opens up so many possibilities.
All right.
More questions?
One over there.
Hi, thanks guys. My question is about the problem of kind of protecting a successful part of your business or product versus kind of really quickly doing the necessary iteration and innovation to kind of take it to the next level. I think it kind of affects every problem or every product. Maybe for each company it's different. I think Uber definitely needs to protect like the fundamental part of its business that is incredibly successful, but maybe it's a problem or a question about a local maxima. But how do you approach that and continue to innovate while also being successful, I guess?
It's an Uber question.
Yeah, it's definitely a big business question. I think when you're small, you don't have much to risk, so you can just do all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, but you also have to, I think, where you innovate is at the fringes,
Yeah.
and you try to innovate at the outside and go in. Like, if one of the things we're learning right now, building tools that help our users turn their pages into a deliverable of some kind to other people. So we just released an app called Intro with the sole purpose. The only thing it does is make introductions. It turns your About Dummy page into a digital business card. We are hoping that pattern, and we're competing with literally handing a physical business card over to somebody else. We're hoping that pattern informs other ideas around how our users perceive the page and how they want to engage with it. I'm not trying to mess with any of the representation tools, any of the feed, any of that yet until I understand what the behaviors that I'm engendering with these small pieces, what they have to do with the rest of the product.
I think within product teams, it's easy to say this product's going to do kind of a lot of local, the hill climbing, and this product line or this set of features is really going to take the big step forward. I think it's a lot harder for one team to say, okay, now's the time to hill climb, and that now we're going to take some time and actually do something really different. Like those are different dispositions, and that's a really hard thing to get within one team.
The biggest problem also is within a larger organization, you wind up with the Microsoft problem, where Office becomes the core, and you don't mess with Office, and you let Office innovate everything, and no one can. It's sacrosanct. Sacrosanct is the worst thing that can possibly happen because it means that you're not paying attention to. It may be the core of the business, but immediately it becomes revenue driven, and it's making decisions for everyone else in the organization. Yeah, I mean, it just seems really dangerous.
It's especially weird when you think about the core of the business, of a successful business, probably was an accident anyway, and that it wasn't really intentionally successful. It's really weird to think about protecting it, but as soon as it starts making money, you just feel like you can't turn off the money faucet for any reason, and so it kind of but then companies get into this situation where if they don't become the next version of themselves, somebody else will, because there's a lot of us out there that are really hungry, and we're sacrificing our lives to build something great, and you never know. We're also going to trip into our own successes too.
That's true.
So one more question, if there is one. There's one here in the front.
Hey guys, my name's Matt, and I have a little bit more of a product-centered question. When you guys come up with ideas for what to build, and you show it to your friends, virtually everyone's going to give you positive feedback. But I'm curious how you guys qualify whether or not something is worth solving or worth your time.
Well, first of all, not everybody gives you. I mean, maybe you have better friends than I do. But the first versions of Avocado we showed to people were like, oh, why would I use that? I have SMS. Like, what are you doing? They're wasting your life, kind of situation. But I mean, I think that's where the business mind comes in. So if you're a designer looking for a co-founder, having somebody that's really business savvy, or taking that on yourself to kind of identify what are the characteristics of the market. When you're in early stage, seed stage startup, the thing that you'll hear from everybody on earth is product market fit, product market fit. Do you have product market fit? I challenge one person in this room to really clearly define that in one sentence. What does that mean? Nobody knows. You're trying to solve a problem for some set of users that don't have a clear set of attributes, and you're basically out there trying to define what that set of attributes is, and then you have to think, well, how big is that set of attributes? How big are the people that fit into that bucket? And can I build a business off of this, or is this a side project where I just want to make a really cool product for a small number of people? And that's a decision you have to make, whether to actually throw some money behind legal fees and all of that, or whether you're just going to make it and ship it into the world and see what happens.
I think early, at the beginning at least, being self-critical is highly important. Being able to kind of take a step back. In writing, in design, in everything, it's helpful to both have an editor to help you with, but you also have to kind of take a perspective of this is not this thing that I've created is not perfect. It needs, the internal voice needs to be negative towards it. Over time, you'll learn putting stuff out in the world, you need a very thick skin because people will absolutely tear you apart. I mean, I build a free product. The amount of critique that I receive, it's, I have to not let it get to me. I have to be aware of what I'm trying to do and the problem that I'm trying to solve, because if I let the editor of Valleywag told me that my product was shit. Like, okay, great, that's just your opinion, man. I just have to kind of be able to move on. But no, if you're in the early days, if you're getting a bunch of positive feedback, that might get you to the point where you can put something out in the world and get the real stuff. And I heartily encourage you to put it out there into the world, because it's
I have one last question. Would you do it again?
Not the way I did it.
What about you?
Not right now.
Would you do it?
Would I start a company?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And would you?
I'm a no.
Okay.
I'm a firm no.
All right, on that note, very interesting discussions. Thank you all so much for the panel, and thank you for listening.